Today, Discovery are honoured to co-host this webinar with the UCD Energy Institute. And I have the great pleasure of co-hosting today with Professor Andrew Keane, who is the director of the UCD Energy Institute. And we both have the pleasure of speaking with Eddie O'Connor. And Eddie is the executive chairman of Mainstream Renewable Power and also an adjunct professor at UCD Dublin. And he'll speak to us today about the new European Green Deal in Ireland. So hi Eddie, how are you today?
Hi Patricia, everything is great, beautiful here, lovely offices.
Super. So Eddie, where are you located right now and what's keeping you sane as Ireland moves out of lockdown?
Well, I've been working away at various things like a book I've been writing and planning and funding this company Supernode, which is also located here at the Nova Centre. Supernode is playing a key role in designing a cheaper method of transmitting electricity in preparation for the building of the supergrid, which is going to be needed as Europe sets about building 900,000 megawatts of offshore wind over the coming 30 or 40 years.
Okay, so actually that brings me quite nicely around to the title of our discussion today, which is the new European Green Deal in Ireland. So Eddie, I'm wondering if you could please tell our listeners, what are the challenges to achieving the current EU decarbonisation goals and whether Ireland can play a leadership role in this?
Well, first of all, to set the scene for something like this, you have to imagine that the world is on a once-off transition to sustainability. And that means all our power and energy in the future has to be by non-fossil fuels. And Europe has set about creating a political environment in which that can happen. And they call it, under Mrs. von der Leyen, the new Green Deal. Now, this will involve the building, as I just mentioned, of constructing something like 900,000 megawatts in the waters around Western Europe, in every water really from Lithuania down to Portugal. And this is going to be an enormously costly, enormously challenging exercise because we, first of all, have no grids in the offshore. And however good the turbines may perform, and they really perform extremely well offshore and extremely cheaply, you just have to get the power from where it's made and manufactured most cheaply to where the people are. So Ireland has a huge role to play in this, and it was great to see recently, in fact just this week, where all the ministers meeting in Brussels actually agreed a 750 billion package in order to have us all come out of this COVID thing. But it's even more reassuring for those of us in the renewable business to see that a lot of this money will actually go towards creating green jobs. And green jobs are jobs that didn't exist before and that will help take Europe out of the crisis in which we've been pitched, or into which we've been pitched by the COVID story. So Ireland can build, in fact, probably 75,000 megawatts, which will finish up supplying about 5 or 6% of Europe's electricity. And it can do this because Europe has said this is the direction we're going in. So we're really in a very, sorry, there's a phone going here. Not that. Sorry about that.
We have live webinars. No, absolutely no problem at all.
No, it's gone now. I should have switched it off. I suppose I should have said to everybody else switch theirs off, but I left my own on. Sorry about that, folks. Anyway, we're in good shape in Ireland, I think, now with the attitude of the government, and we see Europe, which is there's 27 of us have to work together to bring about this once-off transition to sustainability in energy.
Okay, and actually you just mentioned there the attitude of the Irish government. So obviously now the government has recently changed and now the Greens are on board in the government. And is this going to be good, I suppose, for our renewable energy goals?
Well, it's great. I mean, it could hardly be better because all the parties to the programme for government are committed. And I might as well I noticed a quote the other day, which was, I think, one of historic importance in Ireland. It says, "We will also produce a longer-term plan setting out how we will take advantage as a country of the massive potential of offshore wind off the Atlantic coast. This plan will set out how Ireland can become a major contributor to a pan-European renewable energy generation and transmission system, and taking advantage of a potential of at least 30,000 megawatts of floating offshore in the deeper waters in the Atlantic. Now, close quote. So that's the first time I've ever seen not just the Greens, although they had a lot to do with the formulation of that, but the other two big parties as well have set that as their goal. And it is going to take us, not just, this government can't do it because it's going to take about a 10-year lead time, and the next government won't do it. And I believe this is nearly the first time we've ever seen a government say, we're going to do something that's going to happen in 15 to 30 years. And it's great to see that happening. And it's also good to have a Green Minister for Energy who's been in the job before and will be very experienced at delivering something like this.
Good. So actually, you just mentioned there about the Atlantic and the west coast of Ireland. And so I'm just wondering, what are supergrids, and should this be where they are located?
Oh, well, I mean, if a supergrid is a meshed offshore grid which links up with all the existing grids onshore, but there's nothing at sea. There's no grid at sea. And, you know, when you study an electrical system, you realize you just have to have a grid, or else you won't be able to get the power from where it can be generated to where the people are. So the EU has at last recognized that, you know, there will be this huge build offshore, but they haven't addressed the issue of grids yet. So what we're doing here in this country, and I'm delighted to say that this company, Supernode, has a lead, probably a world lead, in creating the underlying technology in that. So it's basically a cheaper way of moving 900,000 megawatts from where it can be generated, let's say in the North Sea, in the Irish Sea, in the North Atlantic, in the Baltic Sea, and even off the coast of Portugal, moving all that power to places in Europe where they have no power. For instance, like Austria, southern Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, they have no real renewable power. So we really have to harvest where we can and transmit it to where the people are.
Okay, and an investment like that, how long would some kind of investment like that, like a wind turbine investment offshore, long would that kind of make to pay for itself?
Well, it all depends really on the price that you get for that power. So if you were, for instance, if you were at a solid price, I have seen 9 years repayment. With the cheap prices that are coming now, I would say it's more like 14 years. But that's quite typical for any big infrastructure project, like building roads or sewage plants or whatever. So we're in line with general infrastructure.
Great. And general infrastructure, I suppose I want to take a more global view of it now and try and understand how do the different regions of the world compare on a scale of wind development?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that, because, you know, people have said, the wind is only available in some places, but actually, when you begin to study it, wind is available across the globe. I've seen wonderful winds in Egypt and in Chile, which are very hot areas, as well as in Scotland and the Arctic Circle, which, you know, are cold. And our northern winds are as a result of low pressure areas like storms coming across from the North Atlantic. And they track across Ireland and losing a little bit of energy. They go across the UK and Denmark into northern Germany and so on. The winds in Egypt, for example, happen because of heating of the land. And when the land heats up, the air rises and drags in wind, in fact. And so there's terrific winds there. And it's very like solar power. The wind reaches a peak during the daytime and, you know, cools down then at night. And then we've seen other types of winds, like you get in the Atlas Mountains in Chile, where, again, the wind runs up the mountains during the daytime, and then when the desert cools down, they flow down, and you get these katabatic and anabatic winds. So you've really got winds everywhere, and we have erected wind speed measuring masts in Inner Mongolia in China and in Texas. So, and there's terrific winds there. So basically, the simple answer is we can probably supply 60 to 70% of the renewable energy demands in the world from wind in the future, and the rest will be done with solar.
Okay, great. And I suppose the last question from, I suppose in our 10-minute chat, I suppose we've got 1 minute left for that, it's a broad question, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions from our audience about this as well. But in 60 seconds, Eddie, do you think Ireland will meet our EU obligation to be carbon neutral by 2050?
Well, that all really depends on, will the future governments follow the line taken by this government? And I believe that they will, because the sales of electricity from the North Atlantic, the near North Atlantic, now we're not talking about going out hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometres, we're talking about going out 10, 15, 20 kilometres off the west coast of Ireland. I believe that you will see successive governments want to do that, because the west coast of Ireland is very underpopulated, very underemployed at the moment, people moving out and coming up to Dublin. So what you're going to see is a huge sale of electricity amounting to about 21 billion euros from sales over there. And that's bigger than the whole of the agriculture, food and marine industries in Ireland so far. So yes, I think you'll see future governments doing that, and we will be carbon neutral by 2050.
Wow, well, what a way to finish our section. So now I'd like to hand over to Professor Andy Keane, who's the director of the UCD Energy Institute. So Andy, have you a couple of audience questions for Eddie?
Sure, thanks Patricia, and Eddie, nice to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. A couple of questions coming in, a couple kind of about the West Coast potential, which you've already referenced, and in particular looking at floating wind. So maybe could you tell us a little bit more about the role of floating wind? It's clearly an emerging technology, but maybe not quite there yet. So just interested to know your thoughts on floating wind, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andy, and nice to talk to you. When you go above a water depth of about 60 meters, it's not possible to have fixed foundations. So you have to put a floating platform in there and put a wind turbine on top of that. And there are some 30 designs being tried out in the world at the moment. I'm aware of ones in Japan, Portugal, France, and Scotland. And so it's not decided yet which one would be most suitable for the North Atlantic off the coast of Ireland. That'll emerge over the next 10 years. But so far, it's really surprising. The ones built in Scotland, for instance, had only a 3-degree deflection at 80 meters above the sea level. I mean, 3 degrees is absolutely tiny deflection. And to think that they were able to face storm force winds in the middle of winter and just have the thing move slightly. So I'm constantly astounded by how technology can solve the problems for us. And it's going to just open up so many new markets in the world, like off the coast of Japan and Korea, where it's like our coastline in the West, it's very deep. So I'm I'm absolutely totally convinced that with what's around at the moment, we're going to be able to build the technology. What is going to be the most interesting and challenging part of this is developing the grid, the meshed grid, the super grid that's going to take all this power from where it can be made cheaply to where the people are.
Absolutely, yeah. That interconnection and energy transmission piece is absolutely central to this. You reference, I guess, a number of the international developments and the technology that's been deployed around the world. Are there lessons, I guess, that Ireland can learn from? Are there countries that are doing well in this space that you think we can learn from in this area?
Oh, I think we're really very far back until Greta Thunberg, launched her great program last year with the kids of the world. There wasn't really enough attention being given to that, and we have had 12 Greens elected here when there was only one before this election. So we're actually looking at a very positive situation, in the world as we speak right now. And let me just see. Can you repeat the question there, Andy?
It was really just, are there countries in particular you think we can learn from, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. I think England is the place really that we should look to in the first instance. They all speak English, we know them very well. And they introduced the thing called the Carbon Trust back in 20 years ago, which was to help people around the world decarbonize. They also have the offshore catapult, offshore renewable energy catapult, which routes money towards research and development. for the, to help with the program. They've designated certain ports in the UK as ones where experiments will be carried out. So I think we've a lot to learn from them and from Denmark, who kind of invented the first turbine, wind turbine, which was the Gedser turbine. And so, yes, we do have to do that, because there's no point in us trying to reinvent the wheel here in Ireland. We can look at what's been done, elsewhere and take the best of that. And even England, which is the best that I know, even they don't have one coordinator that's coordinating the grid and the leasing of land and the environmental impact assessments and all that. So we have an opportunity to leapfrog, building on what's been achieved abroad. We have an opportunity here in Ireland to leapfrog what they have all done. But we certainly, first thing that Eamon Ryan, who's the Green Minister for Energy, should do is to reorganise his department and put people in charge of learning what's been done abroad. And I believe that he will do that.
Very good. Yeah, I think there's definitely north-south opportunities, but I think it's important to remember the east-west opportunities that might be there for us. So it's good to hear that the UK are in a good position. Patricia, I'll hand to you perhaps.
Yeah, so just some very interesting audience questions coming in for you, Eddie. So here's one. So I'll read it out to you. Some people think wind turbines might ruin Ireland's beautiful landscape. What would you say to these people? How do you reassure conservationists and wildlife charities that wind turbines do not pose a threat?
Well, that's a very good question, and we've spent the last 20 years developing on land, so we have lots of experience of resistance, but also high acceptance of wind turbines. It's a human phenomenon that once people have taken a public stance against anything, their pride doesn't allow them to retract their opposition. So the key thing in development is to get in and talk to the people early, show them the research and the facts, and try and reassure them that things will be fine once the wind farm is built. What you do find an awful lot in Ireland and elsewhere is that people are afraid that the existence of wind turbines will lower the values of their houses. Now, there's no evidence around the world, and surveys have been conducted in Canada, the United States, and the UK, and everywhere else, to show that because there's more jobs created, that the demand for houses goes up, so there's no real diminution in value. But once people have taken a stance, they find that. Now, there are some real reasons why building on land has got a limited life in front of it, and that the NIMBYs aren't entirely wrong, if you like, in their objection to it, because we have issues like with shadow flicker on televisions. The blades of a turbine can cause interference, and there are some people who are very sensitive to noise, and we have to have regulations as to how far from a house. But really, you're only going to be able to build wind farms on land in most places amounting to about 30 megawatts, whereas offshore you can do 500 megawatts, and we've got a planning permission for one offshore wind farm of 1,800 megawatts. So, for a whole load of reasons, we're going to see the bulk of development in the future going to be offshore in almost every country.
Okay, and here's another question for you coming from the audience, Eddie. At what point should the Irish government consider setting up a sovereign wealth fund similar to Norway's to capture a steady income stream from what is a massive offshore wind resource?
Oh, well, now that's an interesting question, because
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, no. We need. We do have a sovereign wealth fund which is run by the NTMA at the moment, and before the last meltdown, the last crisis in 2008, it had accumulated a huge amount of money, and it's been run by very competent people. So what you would do, you would designate a sector of that money to go towards green, or maybe even you could go further than that, and that company could raise something called a green bond, a transformational, green bond, or a decarbonization bond, which would allow people to invest money for 30 years. Because this transition of ours and of everybody else's is going to take between 30 and 40 years. And so you really do need some kind of patient money. But patient money guaranteed by the government is exactly, why one of the reasons why government exists, because it'll be able to pay the stuff back at the end of it. So I think it's very important that we do route more money towards renewable energy. In fact, our calculations indicate that something like 1.3 trillion a year has to be spent for 30 years in order to effect this transition. Now, there's 350 billion being spent at the moment, which is a huge amount of money, but it's only a quarter of what's needed if we want to decarbonize the world. And that's a very important fact to keep in mind. And I don't believe that the economists of the world have faced up to this challenge just yet.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand back to Andy now. Andy has a couple of questions for you from the audience.
Sure, thanks, Patricia. There's a couple on, I guess, the future energy mix, particular hydrogen. Interested to get your thoughts on the role of hydrogen, and there's equally one on nuclear, but maybe take the hydrogen one first. Eddie, what do you think about the role of hydrogen for the future?
Hydrogen is as we know, when it burns a very clean fuel. It just produces water. H2O is the formula for water, as everybody knows. But turning electricity that's generated offshore into hydrogen and then using that hydrogen, let's say, to power cars, which actually they take up about 30% of all our energy. But if you were to do that, you'd put them through the only tested technology, which is the internal combustion engine, which has an efficiency of about 18%. If you were to take that same electricity and put it into a battery electric vehicle, you would get 90% of the energy out as motion. So you're going to have to build, when you do the calculations, you're going to have to build something like 7 times as much offshore wind if you want to go the hydrogen route for transport. If you want to go the hydrogen route for home heating, well, then you'd be competing with heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. And they, for every 100 amount of energy you put in there in electricity, you would get out 300 units of heating. Whereas if you burn hydrogen, the best you'll do is get out 90 units. So again, you have to build an awful lot more. So really the hydrogen, and there's a lot of talk about it at the moment, but it's the last, if you like, vestige of the fossil fuel companies to try and hold on to market share. They've even invented a thing called blue hydrogen. Well, blue hydrogen is about 5% hydrogen and 95% natural gas, which is every bit as dirty as coal. 1 ton of coal burnt releases 2.8 tons of CO2. 1 ton of natural gas burnt releases 2.75 tons of CO2. So Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I think we should just go with the hydrogen, or the basic electricity economy, and hydrogen is needed. 70 million tons a year are actually needed to supply feedstock for the chemical industries and steel industries and what have you. So we'll have to make that out of cracking water. But for the rest of the great bulk of society, electricity is the future, Andy.
Very good. Thanks, Eddie. I think you're right. I think the discussion is off now turned to green hydrogen, because hydrogen comes in many forms and you can crack hydrocarbons to get hydrogen if you wish. There's various ways to make it. Can I ask you the nuclear question? Not the nuclear question, but what's your views on nuclear? Obviously, it doesn't suffer from carbon.
Well, I'm an unusual green, and anything that doesn't produce carbon and makes electricity, I'm in favour of. It's really, there's just 2 aspects to nuclear that are going to make it hard sell. One is the cost. The cost of solar, for instance, now is about $500,000 per megawatt. The cost of wind is about $1 million per megawatt. The cost of nuclear is about $7 million per megawatt. So that gives you an idea. Now, also nuclear produces waste, which governments actually have to put a fund in place to deal with that waste. You know, cesium and strontium and plutonium, iodine, all these radioactive compounds have to be kept isolated from the population and treated in some way for 30 years. And I know the British government puts aside $5 billion a year just to deal with nuclear waste. So, you know, whereas I'm in favor of it, if you like, technologically, because it makes electricity without CO2, it just can't compete with wind and solar energy at the moment.
Very good. Thanks, Eddie. Maybe just one final question from me before I hand to Patricia. And it's kind of, I guess, my own question around what you see as the role of the universities in the energy transition. So obviously we're producing a range of graduates. I'm an engineer, so I'm producing electrical engineers and other types of engineers. But what do you see as the role of universities in the transition, Eddie?
Well, I see a hugely positive role, and well, not much stronger than positive, a necessary role, because we need more engineering graduates. Actually, in Ireland right now, we don't have enough engineering graduates even to do what we're trying to do at the moment, and we're importing some graduates from foreign countries, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. I like the idea of a mixture of races and creativities and traditions and all that. So there has to be a far greater number of graduates. Also, research and development, a whole bunch of new knowledge has to be created if we're going to make this transition effective. And I see universities working with business as the way forward here. I've seen it done in various other universities, like in Strathclyde in Glasgow, and where business and universities create new truth. It's a very effective way of creating the new knowledge that's needed. And I see it going on to an even greater extent in China, which has caught up with the West. And as you know, UCD has a strong relation, has even set up a university in Beijing. So I see just this whole university industry complex moving to a new level here in Ireland. And also there's another aspect to it as well, which isn't often articulated, and that is that the economists have no model for what the world is going to look like when we decarbonize. Now, the Nobel laureate William Nordhaus is one of the few economists, and our own John Fitzgerald here, and they have done some work on it. But I haven't seen any comprehensive thing saying, you've got free fuel now. Yeah, imagine a world where you don't pay for the basic raw material. And what does that matter? And how many jobs do we create if we move and let's say build 20 million megawatts of wind and solar? How many jobs will be created in that? And where will these jobs be located? And how is this going to impact on society? It has major impacts on society, this movement away from fossil fuels. And I think that that's where a university really can shine, because it can study these issues. It can take best advice, and universities are normally linked up very strongly with they have clusters of if you like professors and graduates, as you know all about, Andy. And so I see that that's an area that really needs to be done, because politicians at the end of the day, they look to their economists to tell them how to go forward, and if the economists are equipped with this type of knowledge, well, then we will see the transition happen faster. So there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why universities are going to play an important role.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned economists. I think that multidisciplinary approach is absolutely essential, both in the work we do in universities, but engaging with industry, the conversation with government, and having that positive impact outwards on society. So it's very much about, I think, multi and interdisciplinary. I've always been corrected on my multi and interdisciplinary. There's an important distinction, I believe. Patricia, I'll hand back to you.
Great, and that's music to my ears, being from an interdisciplinary institute in UCD. So actually, Eddie, we have probably another 60 seconds left, and I've time for one very quick question, very interesting question. And the audience have asked, could you give some details about your new book, please?
Oh, well, it's just it's really a book advocating renewable energy, pointing out how Paris has actually failed us. It's too easy to leave. I want to show how, I think we've come up with an answer based on what the Chinese are doing and William Nordhaus is doing as to how we're going to create a successor to Paris. And so we outlined that, as well as talking about how the entrepreneur works. How does an entrepreneur see things? And I've been called an entrepreneur, so, whether I am or not, we'll put it down in the book and let other people be the judge of that. It's been exciting lifetime, and I'd like to share it with guys, all around the world if possible. And so,
almost like a memoir.
What?
Almost like a memoir.
It's yeah. There's a lot of memoir stuff in this. There's a lot of history. I analyze things like, for instance, the role of China in the future and the role of Africa. And I've been trying to build wind farms in all those places. and solar plants. And I like to share that experience with people, because I think we need to understand just the important role China is going to play in the future. It's going to be the biggest economy, maybe even be the biggest economy right now. And I think we can't get all het up on any kind of objections to it. There's a war of words going on at the moment, largely associated with this election in November. And I think we should, with great dignity, stand apart from that and understand the great culture that has driven the Confucius culture of China.
Wow. Well, what a great way to finish. Thank you so much, Eddie, for such a captivating discussion today. And also thank you to my co-host, Professor Andy Keane from the UCD Energy Institute. So thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Eddie. That was great. Cheers.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Eddie. And really, really appreciate your time. Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks very much indeed, Patricia. Thanks, Andy.
Cheers.
Great. So thanks everyone, and don't forget that we run these sessions weekly, so check out zoomforthought.ie or sign up to our mailing list at discovery@ucd.ie. Thank you so much everyone. Have a great day.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.